Okay. Good evening. It is 5:05 p.m. and I would like to call this meeting of the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union to order. This is not a hybrid meeting. It is a fully remote meeting, which means all of the public body is meeting remotely. Please note that while we will try to strive to provide means for those attending remotely to participate in the public comment period, there may be technical difficulties or reasons that otherwise prevent or interrupt remote public participation. Therefore, it is important to note that the open meeting law only ensures the public's right to participate and comment at a public meeting by attending at the designated physical location as posted in the notice and agenda. If a member of the public or of the public body has technical difficulties accessing this meeting remotely, please alert us by email. In the event of a technical difficulty that cannot be resolved, we may continue this meeting if necessary to time and place certain. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting that are not unanimous will be done by roll call votes in accordance with the law. Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for adjusting to this last minute change of plans, but I really think it might possibly be in all of our best interest. So, at this point, if any board member would like any item to be removed from the consent agenda that warrants further discussion, that item can be removed. Please make the request now. Otherwise, the consent agenda will be considered for approval in its entirety. And it is a short consent agenda. I would entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes of November 20th, 2024.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Great. Thank you, everyone. At this point, we will pause for public comment on non-agenda items. I do not know if any of the public is there, but we are here to listen to anything you have comment about. We will not necessarily have a response for you this evening. And again, I don't really see any public in Zoom. So we will move on to the administrative report. Mark?
Okay, thank you. I don't have any new hires or resignations or retirements to announce tonight. Give a couple of brief updates in terms of our food service. We have had a committee that's been developed in the last couple of months looking at putting together a proposal for potentially developing our own food service program. It's been led by Susan Grabowski. We're in the cost analysis section of that process, and we'll be meeting with Frank and I will be meeting with Susan tomorrow to get an update, and hopefully we'll have some figures to share with the SU board next week. So that's the update on food service. Frank, do you mind giving an update on potential of electric buses?
Yep. Yeah, so we're resuming our application for the fleet of 18 buses to be all electric, all part of our capital plan and commitment to a climate mitigation and the state goals, state climate the global climate goals that Vermont has passed. In the first round, Windham Southeast School District was put on a waiting list in our application, and 3 buses of the Vernon district were awarded. We're not able to move forward with that because the infrastructure costs for charging made it infeasible to have a partial fleet at the current depot built out. So Beacon Mobility has been a very good partner with our effort in that we do not own buses, and that's not the plan to own buses. But by partnering with them and then them helping us with the application process together collaboratively, we qualify. We are an eligible entity. It's just a matter of the EPA having enough funding to make an allocation. The application is due to the EPA January 9th, so I'll have some paperwork for the board to approve probably at our next meeting. And I would expect we would hear an award determination sometime in May on that application. So that's where we're at. If we are awarded from our previous application, where we are on a waiting list, it would be because other districts that did get an award were unable to implement the grant, and the money flows back to the EPA. We're expecting by March to know whether or not we would be actually eligible under our original application. So we've got a number of things in place trying to pull that all together. Fortunately, Beacon Mobility has met our specifications and done a good job with student transportation, and they have been able to extend the contract within the state's contract extension inflation rate for this fiscal year. I'll be working with them again for fiscal year 26 to see if that's feasible once again. It would be very helpful for us to get through this procurement process, through this grant application before we go out and try to rebid the contract. So that's where we're at.
Last thing I'll share around food service, I forgot. We did hear from Chris Farrow at a recent SU board meeting. Frank and I will plan on meeting with Chris within the next 2 weeks before the winter break as a progress monitoring meeting to see where we are and hopefully some progression.
Thank you. Questions? Okay.
I have just one quick one for Frank.
Sure.
So if we get the grant, what's maybe you mentioned this, but I missed it. I just logged on. What's the bottom line cost for the district for for everything?
Well, the EPA grants are about $400,000 per bus, and that's about 7.2 million. So that would be the grant component. The infrastructure costs, a couple of years ago, we had Green Mountain Power provide us with an estimate, approximately 120,000. And then the actual procurement, the actual purchase price of the bus will be to be determined. The last I heard, a market rate was closer to 500,000 per bus. So that's the part to be negotiated with Beacon. If they're going to own the buses, which is what the model is intended to provide, I would expect that through our contract negotiations, we would make that a mutual benefit. So that the amount of the local contribution toward purchase price would be some form of the annual service contract expense. The analogy is when we awarded the bid to Cosmoscus, who Beacon Mobility acquired, they went out and bought 17 brand new buses, and then their bid was about 1.4 million to provide transportation services to and from school. So that acquisition of 17 buses was included in the annual service contract that we signed with them, and it was a 5-year contract. So that's the format, the framework of moving ahead, but that it's all kind of dependent upon whether or not we get this grant or not, and the extent to which we begin negotiating. And then the other component, of course, is what is the price of the actual bus to acquire. That hasn't been determined.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay, then. Moving on to finance, I would entertain a motion to approve the warrants of November 20th, 2024 in the amount of $584,347.23, and the payrolls of November 15th, 2024 in the amount of $679,651.42.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed or abstention? Thank you. Okay, we are moving on to the main portion of our evening, which is board review of the draft budget, section 2, special education and allocation methods. Take it away.
Okay, Anne, if you could allow me to do a screen share.
I think I already have, but
excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, I will sort of kick off the budget component overview of our special education proposal. And fortunately, we have Tate, Whitney, and Kevin here who will do most of the overview of the Windham Southeast School District Supervisory Union special education proposal. So I'll give you a overview of what I had sent out last Tuesday before the Thanksgiving holiday to the board, and this is a document that's been on the website now for a week or so. And what it represents is the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union fiscal year 26 special education budget proposal, which starts July of 2025 and services through June of 2026. I'll scroll to we have 3 pages of summary data. I'll scroll to the 3rd page to give us a sense of the total proposal. This is to serve a little over 500 students who have an individual education plan within our 10 schools. It is also our special education services for pre-K through grade 12. As you see, in total, we have an increase, obviously more significant than we've seen in other draft components of our budget. But this is very much, as always, driven by our student needs. So the proposal, $20,055,000, up $1.1 million versus the $18.9 million current budget. The major cost drivers of this proposal, the single largest increase is associated with tuition costs for students that we're not able to educate in our schools and are paying other providers. So I know Tate's going to speak to that issue in his overview. So of this 1.2 million, 1.122 million, 654,000. So more than half of the increase is associated with outside placement tuition. In total, our tuition expense this year is 3.4 million, and next year it's 4.1 million. And this is based on students with IEPs and a need for services that is beyond what our systems are designed to provide. So as they say, Tate will discuss that a little bit further. So of this 20 million, I just mentioned 4 million is tuition costs, and then 13 million of this 20 is salary and benefits. So no surprise, it's the majority of the costs. When you look at line items, our salaries in this budget are about 9.2 million, and benefits are nearly half of that, 4.2 million. And as you know, health insurance has been an enormous inflation and cost driver as well. I know Tate also has a staffing overview, so we'll look at that along with enrollment data, as well as some of our student to case manager ratio data over time. That's a document that actually just got refined today and will be on the website and made available also either this evening or tomorrow. So that's the kind of the big picture. This financial statement that you have had, and as they say on the website, it's a summary of that 20 million, and it's organized in this format right here. It's by program, so special education program specifically, and then this AOE is the reference to the project number, whether it's a local expense or whether it is a federally funded grant expense, and then it's organized by location, so that's why you see the sites here, and then grade level. So we'll go through the school age first, and then pre-K, and then you see it's organized by function. How do we deliver services through direct instruction, student support, transportation, and so on. As a very brief overview, just for another minute here, and then I'll turn it over to Kay. You can see, again, we just talked about cost drivers being outside placement and then the salary and benefits. Here you see out of, again, 1.1 million total increase, about 60% of that is here at the high school, 703,000. No surprise in that the high school is nearly half of the entire system. So you would expect that to be the area, the site where we have the most increase. And these tuition costs are in what's considered a direct instruction expense line. And this large increase here is primarily attributed to additional outside placement tuition costs. Some of the other kind of notable changes at the site level, you can see Eleanor Kearney in our office here at the central office works with Tate Whitney, and the special ed team has done a really remarkable job in improving access to transportation for our special ed students. She's worked very, very hard to create as best efficient routes that we can, but still meeting our student IEP needs. So that's what's reflected here in the academy. Fairly significant reduction in transportation costs for those students. And again, this is primarily for those students that are not educated here, and we are transporting them to other services. The other smaller schools, there's quite a variability, especially with a smaller school. It doesn't take too many IEP team meetings and services to be assigned to show, to create a fairly large percent change. I know Vernon Tate's prepared to speak a little more detailed, of course, always being very careful to respect personal information, but Vernon is seeing a fairly significant increase at the secondary level in need for special education services. Looking at the balance here of our school site overview, you see, after identifying all of our individual school sites, we then have our district-wide program overview. So this would be our speech language pathologists, our psychologists, our evaluation team, folks that work at all grade levels, or at all sites, not restricted to just one site. So that is the locally funded overview of the special ed service proposal. And then we have the grant funded programs. And this is where most of the administrative costs are covered through the IDEA basic grant. This has been standard for many years, where any kind of a grant in special education, we try to make sure that it's universally accessed by all of our schools. And the administration's, Tate and his team certainly work very closely with our principals and our case managers throughout the whole supervisory union. So that's where most of the costs are. And then moving into the pre-K proposal, we have the pre-K team that is both at Estieville and at now Canal Street services, and then a relatively small grant that's also available to the pre-K program for a total of 1.2 million. And that is a financial overview of the proposal. Last thing I'll mention is, if any of you did get into the detail report, you would, for example, maybe if you were interested in any of the specific sites, for example, if you were interested in the high school, that starts on page 9. And remember, you're indexing your reference by the 1040 that's associated with the high school program. So if you go to page 9, you would see the detail that identifies all of those costs at the high school level. And remember, the first 4 digits over here on the left identify the school site. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tate, and maybe you could provide an overview of staffing, and maybe a little bit more background on some of those cost drivers that we had just reviewed.
Thank you, Frank.
So, Anne, I will need screen sharing as well.
You should have it already.
Okay, great. Um, so I'll bring that up in just a second. I want to say that my coordinators, Whitney Lind, Brandy Levesque, and Kevin Drury, have worked hard with me and our fellow principals to refine our budget. We take it very seriously to be lean and efficient while also having capacity for our students who move in at any time. This year at our elementary level, we had a number of students move in with a number of plans that required more intensive support to access their public education in a mainstream setting, as well as students who came in who required tuition to placements they were already in. It is always challenging. At our last board meeting, we identified that there is a good amount of students who are arriving because of our unhoused population, which is unpredictable. But I'm really proud of the hard work our educators are doing and meeting the needs of students at all levels. Frank provided a great overview. It showed specifically at Academy that we had an increase in our direct instruction, which we would attribute to increase of a few additional paraeducators. At our high school, we did have an increase in our number of students who are tuitioned out to specialized programs, and that those programs actually had increases in their rates, some which were unexpectedly large increases that the AOE approved this past year. That being said, as Frank mentioned, Eleanor Kearney, my assistant, has done incredible work to refine our transportation plans and to provide us with a substantial savings for what can be as expensive as the actual school tuition itself, the transportation of students. It's also notable that Vernon had a number of students who require specialized placements that are also expensive for either tuition or transportation, which resulted in that increase in costs. All right, so I'm going to share a staffing ratio. Let's see. Here we go. So this is a sheet that Eleanor and Frank and I have been working on. You all see that? The top group is most of our students. We've revised this sheet to really look at things just slightly differently, mostly the same as we have in the past, but to separate a few things out. So we have a total in our mainstream special education students per site. The top three are Brattleboro town. It shows that total of 134 students, down by one from last year. And then our other outlying schools, BAMS and BUHS, to total 413 students. So a little increase from last year, but down from 2 years ago. We then look at our instructional teachers. These numbers are rounded, and I will clarify and have the updated number accurate tomorrow for posting because of our wonderful case management model that Whitney, Kevin, and I have been working on expanding our capacity by having special educators who are dedicated to case management, which allows the other direct service providers to really focus on their direct instruction. It's a very small difference, so we'll just be changing a few little bits with that. But you can see that we have 44 total special educators between all of our schools. And then moving on, then we can talk about that ratio. So the group A, that was most of our students, over 90% of our students, you can see our ratios vary significantly. As an overall, we have 9 students to each special educator. There's a state average that they would hope that we could provide 15 students to one special educator. We know that varies greatly. We do have special educators who have have up to 20 students on their caseload. These are averages at each school. And you can see that our Brattleboro elementary schools are 10 and 11. Dummerston, Guilford are 12. And then we get to be a little bit lower in Putney and at BUHS. These are things that we are working on, specifically with our secondary level. The structure of the school changes. I could highlight that our high school, that number of 7, we would like to see that be higher. However, we have a model where we create hubs that are in each core content with an academic support teacher tied to a special educator. And so we have our ELA, our math, our science, and our social studies hubs, as well as our access hub. And we have other special educators also providing additional supports at a variety of levels, including our behavioral services. And then down below, we're going to talk about additional specialized programming that we have. Okay, our certified student support staff, such as our occupational therapists, our speech pathologists, our school psychologists, social workers, our integration facilitator, our out-of-district case managers, combined with our special education teachers, total 63 teachers, and that brings the ratio to 7 students per staff. When you add in our para educators, we have 46 para educators in the mainstream special ed supports, and that ratio of students. And then all staff combined, 108 staff with 4 students per staff rated. Now, obviously, we have students that require one-to-one support and other students who need small group support at every different level. These numbers don't reflect any specific student's individual needs and level of intensity of needing supports. So moving down the line, we would look at Group B. These are students who require more significant support. And so the top 3 are our students who are in outplacements. We have a total of 48. 11 in our K through 6 or 8 schools. And then secondary, we have 37 students. This is an area that we intend to work aggressively on to collaborate with our Vermont Learning Collaboration that is in process of developing a classroom at Oak Grove School. We'll be consulting on additional programs that can help us, incrementally reduce our outplacement costs and provide specialized supports and accommodations and intervention for students close to home or in those home schools. We also have 24 students who are regarded to have intensive services. So there are students with our most developmental challenges and requiring things like independent living skills and functional academics. Often these students have one-to-one support and require significantly modified programming to meet their individualized needs. That brings us to a total students of 474 students. And then it shows our staffing, including our certified staff, our teachers at the elementary level, and then at the secondary level, 2 at each, as well as our paraeducators, which total 21. So that really highlights that, as students' needs get more intensive, the level of intensity of supports also has to respond at that level. And finally, we have our early childhood special education, our pre-K students ages 3 to 5. It's a wonderful program that we operate. We typically support up to 70 students per year. We have 6 full-time ECSE teachers, and that ratio comes out to about 12 students per ECSE teacher. They also have a couple of paraeducators as well. Brandy Levesque does a wonderful job with that program. So with that, it is our mission to reduce cost, yet we need to also meet the needs of students where they're at and try to do that within the least restrictive environment, which is with their typical peers as much as possible. I do believe that we're successful in this endeavor, but things like our outplacement rates and our staffing ratios are areas that we are actively looking at and hoping to improve. And with that, I guess I would open up to questions. And I'm going to go ahead and move this back up to show the mainstream. Here we go. Oops.
Am I correct that at some point you mentioned the staff to student ratio is not what you would like to see?
I mean, I would always like to have our staff be able to handle the largest number of students at that state recommended level. However, our smaller schools face different demands than our larger schools. There's a lot of nuance and difference in the capabilities of each school to meet a student need. And it really varies significantly from school to school and depending on what the student need is. But yeah, I think that would be an overall area that we are looking at constantly. That being said, our students are demonstrating a significant amount of dysregulation, and there are a lot of instabilities within our community, as we've seen.
I think another piece of that, Deborah, is just that our case managers too, they're not, they are included in here, but they're not directly working with students. They're, taking that paperwork piece. And so that does make it look a little bit different as well. It's just another factor.
Don, you had your hand up.
No, it's good. Thank you.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
We are incredibly lucky. When I've met with people from other districts, I've noticed that we are incredibly lucky to be fairly fully staffed. I think a lot of the higher ratios that you see in other areas is because they've been unable to hire the amount of teachers that they actually need. So their ratios are higher by necessity as opposed to actually meeting the needs efficiently with the staff that they're able to get.
Yeah, I would say we've done significant work at our high school level, clarifying the roles of our Access Hub and our C Behavioral Services. Hannah Parker and Kevin and I have been meeting with those staff, and we're seeing numbers that we're really proud of as far as meeting our layer 4 needs for social emotional support. Or academic engagement. And then working with our high school administration on clarifying the layers of social emotional learning supports for all students. We do believe that MLSS work that we're all doing will, in the long run, help to reduce our overall numbers and costs by building capacity at especially the core, layer 1, and then at those support levels of layers 2 and 3, so that less students are being identified as being disabled and are able to get their needs met in a least restrictive environment.
Anybody else? Okay.
I would just make one plug. The ECSE staff does a wonderful job. Their staffing appears to be fairly stable this year. We never know. One thing that we struggled with at the beginning of the year before school started was having adequate speech-language pathology staffing to meet all of our needs. We were able to secure a contracted provider, Christina Polk, who's been amazing, as well as additional online resources, and have some staff who had been resigning to come back in various capacities at different levels, so that we feel like we actually were well staffed in the area of speech language this year. Moving forward, who knows? And we'll hope that that can be the case. but Brandy and her team are always starting a little light at the beginning of the year and ending really heavy, with a large number of students transitioning to be age 3 by the end of the school year. So we like to have a lot of capacity there to support the needs of our earliest learners, because we know early intervention is the most effective strategy to help students succeed.
Yes, Sean.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure this question probably is not for Tate exclusively, but the WSESD board meeting where you guys made the presentation last week or the week before, and then last night in the finance committee meeting, we were just kind of looking at things in a general sense. And it's obvious to me that the importance of providing all the resources necessary to accomplish the needs of, to meet the needs of all these students. And so I was kind of wondering, just in a budgetary consideration, how do we identify that to the general public going forward? And this doesn't have to be answered now. There's just one thing that I've been thinking about, how we can make sure that the public understands that what we're accomplishing is a statutory obligation that has to be done, and that we have to have the resources available in order to do that. So, but if you switch that over to a budgetary consideration, how is that transmitted to common knowledge by the public? And as I said, it's probably a bigger question than could be addressed here. So I'll just ask the question and let it ride.
I really appreciate that. I think that was actually brought forward in the community session last night, as well as the teachers session of the Listen and Learn tour that Zoe Sanders and the AOE team brought to BUHS last night, talking about our increasing costs related to staffing costs going up, insurance costs going up, and then the level of dysregulation in our students, probably pre-pandemic, but continuing on, is remarkable, and that we're taking on some of the community mental health services because we have the kids right there. And there were even comments about, is that something where another funding stream could be provided to provide more therapeutic supports in our schools? But your point about bringing forward more data and communicating with our public more clearly about what it is we're doing with all of the money that we're needing to meet student needs is really important. And it was also brought forward by that group. I do think we do incredible work. I've got amazing, dedicated teachers. I'm so proud of them. They lift me up to do the hard work that I do, let alone my coordinators who help them to do that work in a coordinated and effective strategy or manner. It is impressive. And so that we have the capacity when students arrive at any given moment at the beginning of the year, it seemed like it was every other day we were getting a new student who was arriving and had a pretty intensive plan at all levels too, at the elementary and secondary level. So it can strain our system to some degree, but we have people that are all hands on deck and they're ready to step forward and help students get comfortable and get ready to learn in our schools. So I really appreciate those comments, Sean.
I was going to also just suggest, maybe not this evening, but to Sean's question, Tate and or Whitney or Kevin, at some point, maybe if we could see a a very general outline of what an IEP service page looks like, and in general terms, and also, maybe in one of our most common disability areas. So to illustrate Sean's point, the budget reflects the expertise that is outlined in the individual education plan. So, first there's an eligibility review in terms of qualifying a student as being eligible for an individual education plan. So, Sean, I'm just illustrating that you would see that in the budget line item under our evaluators and our psychologists. And then, in a typical IEP, there's going to be a number of minutes of services assigned to a student on a frequency over the course of a week in a school year. And those services are going to represent the many, many line items that you see in the budget. Once again, it's a case manager, might be a speech pathologist, might be occupational therapist, but these are all driven by the federal mandate that requires the public schools to meet student need based on a disability that's been assessed, and then identified a plan to bring that student up to par with their peers. So I think that's the sort of the practical relationship to any line item in the budget. It reflects the expertise that the individual ed plan requires for each one of our 500 students.
Well said.
And another reference on our agenda, if we're ready to speak to it, is the assessment methodology for allocating our costs. So if we're ready for that topic, I could share another screen and address that, unless you have something else.
Are there any more questions before we move on? Sean, your hand is still up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. And Deborah, I saw yours up before.
Yeah, I really want to support what Sean just said, and my awkward question about the staff to student ratio, which you said was heavy on the staff side, and yet the needs of students are such that we need sufficient staff to address the needs. And that is based upon the district's assessment rather than the state's assessment or of what the perfect number is. And to Sean's point, is the need, the way we present this to the public to justify these costs. And in no way am I suggesting that we should change the ratios or anything like that, quite the contrary. But we're going to have to be very careful this year. So that's what I hear from Sean as well.
And I think, when I think about that staff ratio too, and I'm thinking about those additional case manager positions, part of that story is really that one of the reasons why we are fully staffed is because special educators want to work here. And that is because our systems do support them. And I think in the long run, over the next few years, as our systems become stronger as a whole, there may be places where we could reduce, because I think that can happen when you have a really well-functioning system and you've gotten it to a good place. But right now, we are still kind of coming out of the pandemic. I hate to bring that up, but we are we are in a good place compared to many districts across the state. And I think that it would be really wise of us to keep that funding level so that we can really see some intensive academic and behavioral gains with our kids. I think we're in a prime spot to see that right now, because we are able to attract people and they want to work in this system.
Randy?
I think it's important to add, it doesn't show up in these ratios, but something that is how much, has been referenced here, like the minutes that Frank was talking about per child. So we might have a staff, like my team has about 12 students to each case manager, but that doesn't indicate how many times that student gets services in a week. And for my team in particular, we travel all over the 5 towns, and kids can be in any one of those towns in lots of different locations. So there are aspects of that ratio or aspects of our work that aren't represented in the ratio that, that take time. Like one student, might be seen 4 times a week by their case manager because of the level of need they have. And then, another student might not need that level, and that's why it's an individualized program. But I think that's an important point to keep in mind. And, and I agree with Whitney that, the funding that we have right now allows us to give students what they need and not, what we can give them, which is the idea of an IEP, is to meet their need, not what is available to them. So I think we're doing a good job of that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that if we don't have capacity and we get a student that we're unable to meet that need, we actually could run into legal fees that are unrecoupable and aren't spent on student learning and student growth, which is really, that's hard to hear. Yeah, great point.
Anybody else? Okay, Frank.
All righty. So the other component of this review is to look at the allocation methodology. We've had a system in place since the state has created a more stable framework for us to work in. So are you seeing the WSESU assessment of budgeted expenditures on your screens?
Yes.
It's a spreadsheet? Yeah, okay. Very good. So there's just a few methodologies that we use, and I would just kind of a review here. Here are the types of expenditures. This goes back to our first budget overview, where we looked at the administrative and the supportive instruction budget at our previous meeting. Today, we're looking at special education. And then we also have an early pre-K special education component that we've just reviewed. And then there's transportation. These are the different types of costs that are managed at the supervisory union that once we receive grants and any other sources of revenue, the difference between these budgets that we're talking about and the revenues that we receive to offset them that net needs to be assessed to the Windham Southeast School District and the Vernon School District. That's all the way the Vermont statutes have set up supervisory unions. And we generally use the default assessment methodology that's in the Vermont statutes. So for the administrative service and supportive instruction, it's a 2-year average of the November student census data. And that is for K-12. We specifically do leave out the pre-K because some schools operate pre-K and others don't. And we want to have a kind of a level playing field on the methodology. So at some point, hopefully we all have pre-Ks in our public schools, but at this point we don't. So that's been the board's methodology. You may, for those of you that were at the meeting last night with the Agency of Ed, I was pleading among many really interesting requests from our public. What can the Agency of Ed do better? Well, how about giving us our ADM data so I can move ahead with budgets? I don't have those as of today. I have preliminary numbers, and I will have to use those preliminary numbers if they don't provide the updated number soon. But that's the basis. We identify our census, we report it to the Agency of Ed, so it's a standard format across the state. These are not weighted statistics. So for the supervisory union cost, it is a straight student count. And it's simply a proportion. So for Vernon School District, it's been about 7% of the total supervisory union enrollment. And whatever that statistic computes will be the percentage that the district pays to sustain those programs in the schools. The special education, we have two types of allocation methods. The only reason why there are two types is because Vernon is not a member of the Brattleboro Union High School. As we know, Vernon is a separate district, pre-K through 12. So there's no distinguishment between a cost at the Vernon school or the Guilford school or any other school in Windham Southeast Supervisory Union at the K through 6 level, or K8, meaning the elementary school building level. So what that means is we take the same total enrollment, about 2,400 kids, and we divide it by the Vernon school district, and then we divide it by the Windham Southeast School District, and those proportions are the percentage applied to in this case, the elementary special education costs. And what that means is it's a shared framework. So if one small school like Guilford or Vernon experience an unusual need in one year, they're part of the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union shared cost, and we all just pay into the system to provide needs for all of our elementary kids. At the secondary level, because the state law requires non-member towns from a union to be treated the same. That means for our Marlboro kids, our Dover kids, our Wurtsboro kids, and our Vernon kids that are attending Brattleboro Union High School, we have to be consistent. So that simply means that we identify those costs and we allocate according to a direct bill, essentially, for secondary to the non-member towns. And they are all treated the same according to state law. And then the transportation, a little simpler methodology that's been in place for many years, and that is where we just take the number of total buses and number of buses assigned to Vernon, which is 3 buses, and number assigned to Windham Southeast School District, which is 15, and it's just that ratio times the total contract, and that, of course, is just for those costs to and from school. Field trips, co-curricular programs, all of that is a direct bill to whatever program orders the additional service. And sometimes it's the same carrier, Beacon Mobility, and other times it's another provider, and that's just depending on availability generally. So I'm working with the student census numbers now, and I had hoped to have that data today, and I would actually show you the results of that. I don't have that from the agency, but I expect to have some kind of a preliminary version by Friday, and I will complete the process. Any questions on that?
Deborah.
Yeah. So I don't know if I missed emails. The shared screen from Tate and right now from you, Frank. Have we received this as documents yet, or is this hot off the press?
Well, the budget you received.
I have that.
Yeah. No, this document that I've just reviewed is it's the same document that you had last year at this time. We're not changing anything. There's no proposal to change it. But I will just take this single page because we've just focused on it and add it to the website. But you've had this now for the past 4 years. It's not changed since we merged. This methodology, okay. The staffing data actually did just come together. Tate was just finalizing that this afternoon, so that data will be posted probably tomorrow morning.
So I appreciate it's going to be posted, but could you also put it in an email to us, please? It just makes it so much easier. Okay.
To find it. I assume you can do that. Yep.
That would be great. Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yeah, I would just wonder, I'm not sure, once again, and this is the proper moment to bring this up, but I was just sort of looking at the numbers, 2,400 total students in the SU, and then 474 demonstrate needs that have to be touched by special education. So that's 20%, I believe. Is that right, Frank?
Yeah. It's actually 500 students when we add our. It's 570 students when we add our pre-K and our intensive services. Yep. So when we look at that, 500 divided by about 2,400. It's over 20%, and that is a higher number than the state average. I think the state average, Tate, I don't know if you got a new one, but it has been around 16%. And again, that reflects our higher level of poverty. Unfortunately, those characteristics correlate, and it also reflects the higher need that you see in our staffing proposal.
Yeah. So once again, I think that there must be a gentle way to make this public knowledge without identifying groups as without identifying groups. In other words, if more people knew that this was happening because of societal changes and societal demands on the education system, then I think people would be more willing to listen carefully and understand why our budget is what it is. So I think that might really grease the ways somewhat, so people understand this is something we got to do. We have to do it. Not only is it a statutory obligation, but we're trying to change things, and the way you change is with education. So I don't know if that's possible, but those are just things that go through my mind on a regular basis.
It's a great point.
And we'll definitely see if we can illustrate some of those examples that connect, like you said, the spending, the major areas of spending with skills and addressing the disability, the learning disability, and maybe examples of where that is we've reached our goals, which I'm sure we have many examples of that. Another thing on the financial side, I want to mention, and Carrie, this I know you. I'm sure you noticed the Vernon fairly substantial increase. Fortunately, a good deal of that will be reimbursed by the state formula for what's called extraordinary cost. Unlike regular ed, where there is no grant specifically for a particular program, in special education, there are three major types of grants, and one of them is extraordinary cost. So I mentioned that our largest cost driver is the tuition for outside placements, and the state pays approximately 95% of every dollar over $67,000 per student. So if a student's cost is greater than $67,000, generally the state is going to reimburse the vast majority of that. And unfortunately in Vernon, that's as we said, the primary cost driver of why you see the total Vernon budget up, but that's not going to be the Vernon assessment, because the assessment will be offset by a substantial increase in a grant. So I just mentioned that. I think that also speaks to your point, Sean, that the state has recognized that it's a disservice to our students and our families that have the highest need, and to not create a support system.
Gary?
Thank you for saying that. I was very worried and was wondering how you guys were going to pull this off Monday night, because I warned Walter what I saw. I know we had this a few years ago where I think we went up 50% or more. It was a massive increase, and we figured out how to sell it. But I think there's only so many times we can go back to our electorate and sell such a huge increase. So I'm hoping the numbers look better. Thank you.
You're welcome.
More questions, discussion?
Just looking ahead, we have food service on our next budget overview. As Mark mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we'll have a baseline recommendation that will be in the budget document, and we'll have the analysis of the alternatives that we've considered, and so we'll review that. I do expect to have the revenue side and the assessment side of the supervisory union budget for that meeting as well on the 11th. And so we would have a comprehensive document as well, meaning as we normally do, we would have the 4 sections of the budget in one document as a complete draft. But that's all I have for this evening.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you very much. Very informative. If we're ready, I guess we can move on then, unless there are any further discussion or comments, questions. Okay, thank you again, and get home safe, Frank.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're moving on to old business. That is policy, and the following are presented for a second reading. D1, personnel recruitment, selection, appointment, and background checks. D2, professional development. And D4, educator supervision and evaluation, probationary teachers. If you have any comments, send them to the policy committee and we will go back over them again. All right, the next thing on the agenda was contracts, and this was regarding future contract negotiations. And Tim, you asked that this be added to the agenda. Would you like to discuss it, or?
Okay. Are you with me?
Yes.
So if you can bear with me just for a few minutes. I feel there are several compelling arguments for why unilateral contract negotiations with the superintendent should be avoided. And this is with the understanding that I'm not speaking particularly to this board, but to, we're still in the evolution of forming the protocols for various boards. So my arguments generally revolve around the governance best practices, transparency, accountability, and the importance of collective decision-making. So first point, a unilateral contract negotiation is contrary to collective decision-making. School boards are designed to function as a collective body, with decisions made through collaboration and consensus. A unilateral negotiation undermines this principle, as it places too much power in the hands of one individual and may sidestep the voices of other board members who have a legal and fiduciary responsibility to be involved in such decisions. And as such, I think every board member should not place this responsibility solely on the chair or be allowed to. Second, lack of transportation. Unilateral negotiations can lack transparency, making it difficult for the public and other stakeholders to understand how decisions are made, especially regarding such a very critical leadership position. The implication is that the process could foster distrust within the community and among staff members and board members. And as stakeholders, community members may feel excluded or misinformed about the terms of the superintendent's contract. Third, there is a potential for conflict of interest. When negotiations are handled unilaterally by the school board chair, there's a risk of it setting a precedent that may lead to future conflicts of interest, especially if the chair has any kind of personal relationship with the superintendent. Again, I'm talking about boards in general. Fourth, and this is important, I think, lack of diverse perspectives. The unilateral approach limits input from other board members who bring valuable perspectives and expertise to the negotiation process. The entire SD and SU boards, and I mean the entire SD and SU boards, should have an opportunity to discuss the superintendent's performance goals and the terms of their contract. The implication is that without input from all members, the terms of the contract may not fully align with the district's needs or the interests of the community. And remember, all of us SD members are representatives of the community. Number 5, it has the potential of undermining board superintendent relationships. The superintendent is essentially, as we know, the CEO of the school district. And the superintendent's relationship with the board chair and the board as a whole is crucial for effective governance. When one individual handles contract negotiations without sufficient transparent consultation with the full boards, it could create an adversarial or mistrustful dynamic between the superintendent and the rest of the board. So the implication is that this can weaken collaboration, reduce communication, and negatively impact the functioning of the district. 6, just a few more, the risk of setting a dangerous precedent. If a school board chair negotiates a contract unilaterally, it sets a precedent for future negotiations that could be difficult to reverse. This could normalize a practice where the board is sidelined in key decisions, potentially leading to power imbalances in future matters. 7th, you just have better contract outcomes with the board involvement, full board involvement. When the full board is involved in the contract negotiation process, there's a broader set of skills, expertise, and viewpoints that can help in crafting a more balanced and thoughtful agreement. And this is true not only in contract negotiations, but in establishing a strategic plan and goals for the district. And last, the public perception and accountability. Public trust in the board's ability to act in the best interests of the school district is critical, as we know. If the public perceives that a single individual is making decisions unilaterally, it can diminish confidence in the board's ability to govern effectively and responsibly. So in summary, avoiding unilateral contract negotiations with the superintendent ensures that the board maintains its role as the governing body, promotes transparency and accountability, and fosters a healthy collaborative environment. These are all vital for ensuring the long-term success and integrity of the school district. Now, what I was considering was making a motion to on this regard, but I think the matter of contract negotiations with the superintendent is so vital to the good of the board and the district that I'm asking the board to consider not making a motion, but to consider writing a policy on contract negotiations and the entire process for evaluation of the superintendent. That's all.
Deborah.
So a couple of clarifying questions, because I think this raises the whole issue of, regardless of this particular issue, the role of the chair. And I think about issues perhaps coming out of an executive session where decisions are made there that are on the shoulders of the chair, and the chair acts on that, but there is no transparency coming out of executive session. And that always makes me nervous as a chair to move forward where a board member could say, that's not how I understood the discussion in executive session. And I feel as if the chair overstepped responsibility. So I'm talking about my role as chair of the SD and some of the issues that have come up. According to statute, I do have a question. According to statute, my understanding is that there can only be one chair. There cannot be co-chairs. So it would be lovely, perhaps, if there were co-chairs, or in signing a contract, My understanding is essentially it's one person from the board signing that contract. It's the chair. So I guess I'm asking for clarification about statute. Who signs off on issues such as this? Again, my understanding is that it is the chair by statute.
It is the chair. The chair generally does it at the direction of the board. It's the signature is only a technicality. As far as co-chairs go, I do not know the answer to that question.
I sort of recall it coming up in the past. I don't know whether it occurred when Kelly was chair. And again, off the top of my head, I seem to recall there's only one person. And I wonder if I'm hearing Pietro Lynn's voice in the background.
We can discuss this with Pietro, but my understanding from reading the statute is that nothing precludes this 5-member board from all signing the contract. It doesn't have to be one person. But the point is that certainly negotiations, and especially negotiations regarding the discrete matters of the contract, should be a full board enterprise. Getting back to your question about the role of the chair, Deborah. I'm sure a lot of board members have thoughts on this. First of all, I agree with Pietro that when we have an executive session, I think we can do a much better job of informing the public about what the session is about, more than simply reading the statute. It's contract negotiations. Well, we could say contract negotiations of the superintendent. It's just an example. But I think we should inform the public better about what executive sessions are about, rather than, of course, student matters, you have to be careful. Understand that. But Pietro once said that, we don't have to be so coy or so, we can do a better job in telling the public what the executive session is about. Regarding,
can I just respond to that?
Just one more regarding your point about the chair perhaps misrepresenting the board. Not misrepresenting, but not conveying the exact.
Well, that was an issue of where the chair might feel that that chair had received a mandate to act in a certain way, but because minutes are not taken, that can easily be disputed in the future by a board member. I do think that these issues, this very conversation that you and I are having, I think we need Pietro Lynn in on this conversation rather than suppositions right now.
Sean,
anyway,
those are my
thoughts. Those are my thoughts.
Sorry, Deborah. Sean, you've been waiting patiently?
Yeah, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but the negotiations that was mentioned, does that have just to do with the negotiations for the contract for the superintendent, or are you speaking about negotiations for the master agreement?
I don't think we're discussing the master agreement right now.
Okay, so just the negotiations regarding the contract with the superintendent. Is that correct?
That's what
so.
I'm sorry?
That's what I was speaking to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't help but say that, a board elects a chair. The chair has certain responsibilities, and then the chair carries out those responsibilities on behalf of the board. And it's not like it's done in a vacuum. It's done with understanding. And I think very often, if you have a negotiation situation, and then you have 5 negotiators and 1 recipient, it's not a very comfortable situation. So I personally don't see any difficulty proceeding with the methods as they have been, which would be the chair signing the contract. Thank you.
The signature of the chair, actually, I don't think is the important part. If what Tim is talking about is the whole board negotiating it, I don't think whose signature is on the piece of paper makes that big of a difference. But Deborah.
I think there's value in having more than one board person in every conversation of this nature, of negotiation. It provides exactly what we need, which is accountability and transparency. And that doesn't mean that the details of that negotiation are front and center. Those tend to be in executive session in terms of the negotiation, I would think. But it means that, I do see value in 2 people being in the room to counter, to clarify, in terms of these kinds of conversations. But the responsibility, I think, is ultimately on the chair's shoulders. Thank you.
Carrie.
I agree with a lot of what Sean said, especially 5 of us cannot sit in a room and negotiate. We will never get a contract signed. And that's not, we have to remember, that's not how boards work. Boards work as a single entity. We talk, as we have done in the past. We come to a resolution, which we did. We tell the chair what to do, which they did, and we get a contract signed. So I'm fine with it stands. It worked the way it was supposed to work. I was not surprised by the outcome at all. I do appreciate, though, what Deborah had to say, because I, as a former chair, would always love to have a second person in the room. But I don't think that requires anything more than the next time this comes about, or any time any decision comes about, we as a board in executive session can say, we want the chair and to do this. I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill, and what was supposed to happen happened. I don't know why we're talking about this again, but we are, and I'm willing to. But 5 people negotiating isn't going to work. A board coming to a resolution and telling the chair what to do is what we're supposed to do. And then if we would like that chair to have backup, I think that's wonderful of us to give a chair some support. So
I want to just add to my own comment. And when we were talking about contract negotiation having to do with collective bargaining, and on the SD side of the house, as chair, I felt very strongly that there had to be 2 board members in that room, not just one. I think it makes a big difference. I think for me, it's on the order when you go to a conference, rather than spreading out your resources to go to numerous workshops, you want to pair up because you're going to hear it in different ways. But then again, it is that one person who has been elected chair that bears the weight of the burden. That's my view.
I'm sorry that my arguments have not really persuaded everybody here. This is not a molehill, first of all, but nor is it, this is pretty standard practice outside our district too. Talk to VSBA, who a lot of us put a lot of stock in their opinion. They would say, of course, contract negotiation should not be unilateral. For the purpose of collective decision-making, transparency, conflict of interest, diverse perspectives, setting a dangerous precedent, the outcomes, perception, and accountability. I can't make a more stronger argument for why contract negotiations and the terms of a contract should not be unilateral. So I've made my case, and what I'm calling for is policy on the whole evaluation and contract negotiation process. And in that policy, I would expect, at the very least, that there be a note about at least 2 or 3 people get involved in the negotiation. So I've made my case, and we have a committee.
Happy to bring it before a committee. I just thought I'd tell you for the record that if for some reason I was in this position again, I would refuse to do it by myself, no matter what the board told me.
So can I speak?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I don't think that there is a chasm here. I hear what you're saying, Tim, and I don't think it should be unilateral. I do think that having a duo present for exactly the same reasons, what I've already said, I think I've said it twice, that back and forth, that check and balance, which I think is essential. I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. I don't know that both people can sign the contract. I don't know that legally that works that way. I think there is statute that says, Kelly and I looked into this, that there is only one chair. The statute does not support co-chairs. But I do think it should be a duo. I agree with you. In terms of negotiation, in terms of those behind closed doors conversations that push it to that final moment of contract. So it certainly can be something that we look at in terms of policy. And by policy, I guess you mean the policy committee on the SD side.
Actually, I'm not, because this would not affect the SD. So I'm thinking that
this should be
develop for the first time, develop their own policy.
Got it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Carrie, is your hand still up?
Yes, it is. So I'm not opposed to us exploring a policy, because in many ways having one can make it easier on future boards. What I'm opposed to is the continuous use of the word unilateral, because we didn't have a unilateral decision or a unilateral contract. We had 5 board members sitting in a room for hours upon hours, coming to a resolution and telling the chair what to do. And the chair did it. End of story.
Well, we're getting into executive session stuff here, and we can't really speak to that.
So I'm fine if we want to explore a policy that lays out exactly what we just did. I'm fine with that.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, are you volunteering to write it?
I'll write a draft.
Yeah, that's what I meant, obviously.
Well, one of the things I was just thinking about on this whole thing, the SU is made up of 2 districts. And so if you had a representative from the WSESD and a representative from Vernon, it might be a pretty nice way to make sure that all the systems are covered. That's it. Thanks.
Not a bad idea. Anything further?
Yes, one more thing, and that is going to Sean's point. We happen to have 2 districts under the SU. If we had 3 or 4 districts under the SU, that policy would be such that we'd want a representative from each of the districts. Anyway, it's something to be worked out in terms of creating policy. I was talking hypothetically. I shouldn't do that. It's complicated enough as it is.
Okay. I prefer to keep next week's meeting as short as we can, but let me know, Tim, when you have something started, and I'll put it on the agenda.
Okay.
Okay. The last thing on our agenda was an executive session, if necessary, and we are going to have a brief one under 1 VSA 313A3, the appointment or evaluation of a public officer. We're still working on the superintendent's evaluation. No action will be taken tonight. Thank you very much, everybody who turned out. So if you want to take off, feel free to do so.
Don't we have to vote on that?
Wait,
Don't we have to vote on that?
We
Hey,
do. We haven't gone into exec. Yeah,
yeah.
we haven't done it yet. So,
Motion.
but they've all left.
Ann, can you hear me?
I can.
Don't we have first readings? Or did I copy the agenda wrong into my minutes?
Mhm.
I didn't. Did I skip them?
Yeah.
We did the second readings, but I've been
did.
taking notes
I
as we go.
apologize.
That's okay.
I apologize. Everyone has left, but we are presenting for a first reading.
Okay.
F4, searches, seizures, and interrogation of students by school personnel. F5, searches, seizures, and interrogation of students by law enforcement personnel or other non-school personnel. And F22, student assessment. I do apologize for making that mistake. Thank you for catching it, Gary. I'm switching back and forth between screens.
Kudos to the WSESD. Sorry.
Precisely. Again, I really strongly feel like we've done most of the discussing and arguing and changing probably 2 or 3 times already. So we might as well wait till it's adopted on the SD side of the board before we adopt it on the FU level. So it's just smooth. But anytime anybody goes, hey, wait a minute. No, stop. I'm happy to send it back to committee. That's not an issue.
Right.
So now I would entertain a motion to enter into executive session under 1 VSA 313A3, the appointment or evaluation of a public officer. As I said, we are working on the superintendent's evaluation.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All right. All those in favor, please signify by. My apologies. Could we take that vote again? I hit a button accidentally. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, we will now be entering into executive session. Okay, we are rising from executive session at 7:35. And I don't think there is anything else we need to do.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
there being no further business before this board, I move we adjourn.
Is there any discussion?
No, and I
All those
second
in
it.
favor. Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? And we are adjourned at 7:35. Thank you very much, everybody.